be with Finn. Finn's my oldest child, so they're here to help us learn a little bit about how the school has impacted them and continues to impact them. First, 10-year-old Cora is going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to ask her to talk about how stories and play arcs help her play. Okay, Cora, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi. How it helps me play is sometimes what we do is we just find a story that, like, it can be anything, a TV show or a book, and for starting our plays, we sometimes base our plays off of that, and then we add in bits and pieces of our own and just go on and on. We don't do some actual planning of what we're gonna do. We just play the story as like when this one game, and it was based off of this TV show, and we added bits and pieces in. So there was like this queen and lots of pets and princesses and stuff like that. And it was about controlling the elements and stuff and what we did. So once we decided what we're gonna play and the bits and pieces, what we did was we played it, and while we were playing, we just made it up.
Cora is she's straight out of the pool, everyone. She just swam probably how many meters? Like, I don't know, at least 1,000? Yeah.
More than 1,000.
More than 1,000. So she's right out of the pool. Cora, I didn't get to, your mom sent some photos of some of your recent play. Is it okay if we share the photos of Small World Play with the adults of our school? I think it'll be evident. Leslie's going to share a screen just so you can see these. I think it'll be evident how story was all over the creation of these worlds with, I love that you use so many different materials, Cora, to make these worlds. Can you tell us about, like, just a sentence or two about what was going on there? Do you remember?
So me and my sister, we made these homes, and
Corey, you might have frozen. Leslie, will you switch to the next photo?
For that one, yeah, that's my house with all the horses.
So it was a house, a world for the horses?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Cora, thank you so much for telling us about your play. Sorry, I think I muted myself accidentally. Okay, Finn.
Wait, I just want to say, Cora,
yeah.
Teresa posted in, Cora, I love the part about controlling the elements and pets and queens. That is a play arc I want to play in. Thank you, Cora. I'm so proud. All right.
And Finn, will you tell us a little bit about how stories and play arcs help you with getting along with like others? I'm gonna slide out of your way so you can have front and center.
I think that stories and play arcs help you get along with other people, because when you are deciding what to play, you get to practice collaborating with others, because you got to listen to other people's ideas, because you got to know what play arc you want to play in order to play it. An example of this is when a group of friends and me, we had all read the same book series. It was called The Land of Stories. We liked the books so much that we wanted to have a play arc that went along with this, so we could play it in real life. Since everyone had read the books, everyone had to have their own favorite book, and every one of us had a different favorite book. So we were all experts on that book. And so each person had their own ideas that they wanted to add into the arc. So we had to work together and to listen to each other in order that we could have everyone have a part of their book. Making up something to play with the group also helps practice compromise. The ideas for play cannot just always be your ideas. Everyone has to be flexible and compromise, or else it will just be a jumbled mess, because you have to include everyone's ideas so that you can play fairly and everyone can have fun. And so that this group, the play arc that we came up with, was actually more fun than something that I would have thought up on my own, because we had to collaborate our own ideas, and our own ideas were different, and we ended up liking other people's ideas more than we liked our ideas. And it was so much fun that we ended up playing it for over 3 months. And we were so into it that we gave each other Valentine's Day gifts to use in our play arc. And then after that, since it was so complex and so fun and we loved it, the play arc split off into 5 other smaller different play arcs that covered a small topic.
Thanks, Finn. And 12-year-old Diana, will you talk a little bit about how stories and play arcs help you write your own stories, your own original compositions?
So I always remember Leslie used to read us Baba Yaga, which it's about a witch who kidnaps children and eats them. So there's always a scary side to the stories that she told us. And then after she told us the stories, we would go outside and we'd end up playing based on those stories. And now I actually like to write short, scary stories with 2 friends who happen to go to the same preschool and had the same experience. So we sort of have the same love of scary things, because we were able to play and listen to the stories that Leslie told to us.
Thank you, Diana. I just think I invited a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old here because I just think it's amazing to know that they are still playing stories. I'm echoing on someone, sorry. And I think why they're still playing and writing stories is because, sorry, I think maybe that's fixed now, is because the element of story makes their play so interesting and engaging and lasting. And I think this is a gift. Leslie and Ada and Teresa, sorry, why do I use Leslie like the collective? But our teachers teach the students how to infuse story into their play so that the play has, it just has a big substance and it lasts over time, over days, over months. And this is still happening for these these alumni children. Thank you, Diana and Cora and Finn, for joining us. We appreciate hearing your insight. And now we are going to, I'm going to pass the floor over to our development chair, Sunny. And I think also Leslie is going to help with this portion too.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. Thank you, former students. That was awesome to hear. We wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about a new initiative at the Purple School, our Ripple Scholarship Fund. So actually, Leslie's going to kick us off by talking a little bit about what this is. So Leslie, over to you. Okay. So at our last membership meeting, Amy talked about our wooden blocks and how they were the very same blocks so many other children have played with, including those presenters tonight, Cora, Diana, and Finn. These blocks have been moved from Old Town Tacoma, our very first location in the basement of what is now the food co-op, to our location on New Hampshire Avenue, and now to the cedar shed of our outdoor classroom on Flower Avenue. In Reggio Emilia, they tell us how the schools there were built post-World War II, brick by brick, block by block. We predate those schools. We were founded in 1942, and yet it resonates. Our families and the children have built our Purple School, and I do mean the children, by the way, because they've dug many foundations in the backyard. They have built our Purple School by brick, block by block. Now, wooden blocks are measured in units, quarters, halves, whole blocks. We need all of them to make a structure. Families and teachers for decades wished for a fund to assist families financially, but there were two hurdles. The first was really about management of a fund. It would require ongoing attention, and we did not have a model that we could refer to that could launch with an all-volunteer organization. Times have changed. With networking, we discovered several apps now available on the market. If you can't build it block by block, build it code by code. And the admissions team has vetted these, and we are ready to launch with one. The second hurdle is to fund this initiative. We will be reaching out to our alumni. I know they will be thrilled to find out we were ready to jump. Here, the development committee will be taking the lead. So this is where the Ripple Fund comes from. When you drop a pebble in still water, the effect ripples out. The part becomes a whole. So over a decade ago, as we started to think about our small school's impact, we hope to grow, to ripple out, to reach others we have yet to meet, to connect, to grow, to learn us alongside and with. So we drop a pebble and the ripple reaches far and wide. And the pebble we needed was missing. So honestly, all of our dreams of positive change are ready to manifest. The pebble, the Ripple Fund, makes our dreams a reality. As an alumni of the school myself, I am thrilled. I've been sitting meeting after meeting after meeting talking about something like this, listening to families really wanting it. So I will be making my donation. Block by block, ripple by ripple, we will get this done. I can't wait to make my donation. Leslie, that was beautiful. Yeah, so everybody, I'm so excited that our group, all of us here, we get to be the pebble that makes this happen. And so as your development chair this year, I'm happy to announce that the annual giving campaign that we engage all of the current members in, it's called Every Family Gives, this year will be dedicated to starting that Ripple Scholarship Fund, to being that pebble. So it's something that we do as a tradition at the Purple School every single year. And this year it has a very important meaning. We get to be the founding members of this scholarship fund, and that is very special. So in addition to talking to alumni about donating, we are going to ask you, the current members, to be a part of this. And you will be getting an email, probably a couple of them over the next couple of weeks, the first one coming later this week from the development committee, asking if you would like to be a part of this movement, to be a part of this pebble. So I want to stress that, any donation is really, really valuable and important and appreciated. One thing that's been powerful with the Every Family campaign, the current member campaign that we do every year, is that we want to be able to say we reached 100% giving. everybody at some level, whether it's $5 or 500, everybody in the current membership group was able to contribute to this. And that's a really powerful message to send to alumni and to grant makers and others that we want to be a part of this community. So please, we encourage you to give it a level that's appropriate for you and your family. If you'd like to, forward that message to grandparents, other family members who might want to make a gift in honor of your child who's attending the school. Of course, the gift is tax deductible, and we'll give you the receipt and all of that kind of thing. I also wanted to say, if giving is not right for you and you want to contribute in a different way, we're looking for people who'd be interested in being thank you letter writers. If maybe you have amazing penmanship and want to show that off, we'd love to have your help. We are a tiny development committee, myself, Emma Bennett, and Julie Hoffmeister, and we really want to make sure that people know how much their gifts are appreciated. So we're looking for people to support with thank you note writing, and we'll supply you with the stationery for that. So please get in touch if you're interested in that. And again, watch your inboxes and your mailboxes to learn more about this Ripple Scholarship Fund. Of course, at any time you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, to Leslie, to Teresa from admissions. It's really, it's going to take us all to put that first pebble in to make that ripple. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Oh, I just got really large on my screen. Nice. We have just a few more minutes before our parent education portion begins. Leslie, Teresa, would it be okay if you share a brief tale from school? Either of you could jump in to go first, but a story that you could share from our children's school.
You can go first, Leslie.
I'm excited about this. Hold on. I don't know how to do this. Hold on a second. I have to add a spotlight. I'm going to keep you there. So hold on just a second. Add a spotlight. Okay. So, so the Leaves had their first forest day today. So that was exciting because we talked about the perimeter of the forest where you go towards the gold. And one of the things, you have to stay away from the light. I'm sorry. So it's like just the whole idea of talking to a group of children about staying away from the light always makes me kind of laugh inside, but it's like, it's very effective. And then with both classes, we've been talking to the children about the grandmother trees in this beech forest, and they all love on these grandmother trees. So they come over and they're like, is this the little sister tree? Is this the little brother tree? And they want to, they tap it. I have all these great pictures of the children in the Leaves class touching each one. And so I'm really happy to share the going outside the gate with the Leaves class. I'm very grateful for it. I'm glad that we were able to launch it in November, and which is kind of early for us. So I'm really happy. And I want to thank all the parents for picking up at that alternate site. Now, here's what I want to tell you what you have ahead of you. So the tracks class hiked in the rain a couple of Fridays ago, and it wasn't just any rain. It was a cooperative school rain, which means that it was pouring. It was torrential. And they voted on going up this cliff. So it's called the Cliff of Doom. It's called all kinds of things. You ask your track, they call it all kinds of stuff. But I call it the Cliff of Tears because there was a lot of crying. Because we had the incline was like this. I swear it was like this, which meant that I climbed up it, everybody was climbing up it, and it was a lot of work. So a couple weeks later in the sunlight, we went to go back because we all got up it. Everybody got up. And we went back to look at it, and we said, and the kids were reluctant. Some of the kids were really reluctant to go see it, even in the sunlight like that. And we stood at the top, and they all looked down, and it was amazing. Can you imagine the resiliency these children are gaining from something like that, that they look down at this cliff that they climbed up in the rain, in the sunlight, and how different it looks? Well, here's the deal. So yesterday we read this book that's called, oh my gosh, I'm going to call it the wrong book, Problem Solving, what is it called? Amy, you'll know what it is. Anyway, that book, it's going to be in the weekend review, so you'll get it. And it's about Ashima, who is a world-renowned boulder climber. And she looks at boulders, she calls them problems to solve. And your children, your tracks children, bought that idea so much so that I could talk to them today about going to 0 to 60, and I could say, what happens when you're at 60 and go, and they all are like, that's a problem we need to solve. Everybody needs to celebrate is what I'm saying. It was a great day. Let me find you.
Me? Is it me you're finding?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I have a story that is, my story takes place on the play yard because that's where seeds are every day at this point for now. But so a lot of you, I think, will have seen the ladder that lives on the play yard. And, you know, it's like a big aluminum ladder. It's some number of feet. I don't know, 6, 8, it's a ladder, an actual ladder. And so I was there, and it was kind of towards the end of Seed's class. And this child comes out from behind the storm house, all the way in the back corner, carrying the ladder, dragging the ladder. Is like, hey, can somebody help me move this ladder? Some other kids come over and kind of try. And I went over to, you know, to assist the process, to scaffold the moving of the ladder, but didn't move the ladder. This child moved the ladder all the way from that corner to the tea house, which is in the front part of the play yard. So now the ladder's there, and the ladder, it needs to go up against the tea house. So we figured that out and got the ladder up against the tea house. So now what can happen is he can climb up, and climbs up, climbs down, grabs a brick, climbs up, puts the brick on top of the roof, takes the brick, climbs back down. That was mission accomplished. That was the whole thing for that day. And so then I come back to school the next day, and I look at the roof of the tea house, sorry, the one that's up front, or the ladder still is, and there's like this whole brick arrangement up there, and crates are there, and the bricks are not. The bricks have been very intentionally placed in a way. Some of the bricks are vertical, so there's this whole design, this whole thing has been built, and I'm thinking about how much effort, how many trips up and down the ladder took place to make that happen. But it was this thing that I know happens at the Purple School, where one class leaves a play invitation for the next class, leaves a play invitation for the next class. Every time that you walk into the play yard, it's a whole new place, because the children have created something and left it for the next group of kids. And that was just so exciting to me to see that there's this play that even can extend beyond their class group and their class time. So that's my story. I don't know where the ladder is now. I'll have to see tomorrow.
And wait, did the ladder seed child love that roof?
The ladder seed child has not seen it yet.
Oh, okay. So that's going to be tomorrow morning.
Yes, maybe. I mean,
well,
I wasn't there today,
yeah,
so
because actually, the ladder has moved yet again. There is a business taking place on top of the tea house roof. So I think that it's really it's lovely. We have actually welcomed Minh Lê onto the call. So hold on a second. We just got a little bit of a close of a story, which I'm sure that you can appreciate. So that the kids leave play messages, and it really resonates with what the children earlier were talking about. So it's like that we leave play messages and the play arcs multiply. And so here we go. I'm going to hand it back over to Amy. So welcome. Welcome. Okay, remove stuff that light. Okay.
Well, I am honored to welcome author Minh Lê back to Tacoma Park. And I say back to Tacoma Park because Minh lived right here in Tacoma Park for about a decade before moving to California. And Minh is the author of picture books Lift, Drawn Together, Let Me Finish, and The Perfect Seat. His book Lift was named a Washington Post Best Book of the Year, and Drawn Together was winner of the 2019 Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. For his day job, Min is a federal early childhood policy expert with experience working in education at the national, state, and local levels, both in and out of the classroom. And he currently serves on the board of We Need Diverse Books. And maybe my favorite tidbit is in 2018, Min was named one of the 100 coolest dads in America. We're just really excited to learn from you tonight, Min. So I'll hand it over.
Yeah, no, thank you for that lovely introduction. I never went through and looked at the methodology behind the voting for the 100 coolest dads in America, but I'm just gonna take it and run. I'm not gonna question it. I was somewhere, I think at the top was LeBron James. There was President Barack Obama, and I was somewhere in the middle. So I will take that as a victory, and just keep that as a feather in my cap. But yeah, no, thank you so much for letting me join you all. I said, like Amy said, I've lived in Tacoma Park for about 10 years. I have a wonderful soft spot in my heart for it. Both of my boys were born there. We're going to talk a little bit today about the power of stories and how we as a family kind of cultivated a culture of reading and stories within our family. And so much of that took place in Tacoma Park. We spent so many days at the Tacoma Park Library. I'm not sure if you remember the cheesecake place. We spent so many days there reading and having coffee and cheesecake and just spending time downtown. So my kids still talk a lot about Sligo Creek all the time. So we live in San Diego now. We moved in 2019, just before the pandemic hit, to be closer to my wife's family. But we love Tacoma Park like so much. So it was when I got the invitations to come to spend the night with you all, I jumped at the chance. So yeah, but when I talked to Amy and she passed on some notes from Leslie about what you wanted to talk about tonight, you mentioned kind of like talking about the power of storytelling and the role that stories can play in our lives, as well as like some thoughts on how to, like I said, cultivate that like kind of reading environment and like culture of stories in the family. So I thought I would start out by talking a little bit about like how books have changed me and how the role that books have played in my life. I do want to pause along the way for questions. Like we can keep this as informal as you like. I'd love to kind of like hear from you all and hear what you're thinking. But I thought I would start by sharing my screen real quick. Hold on one second.
Oh wait, let me pass you over. Hold on. Multiple, yes. Okay,
great. So a lot of times when I go and talk to kids, they ask me like, when did you know you wanted to be an author? And I never had a great answer for that. As a kid, I was very much, I was kind of debilitatingly shy. And I always had my nose in a book, and I always thought of like books as my escape from the world. But then a friend of mine was cleaning out his house, and he found this poem that I wrote back in the day. So I was going to share this with you to kind of set the stage. So this is me back in elementary school. I was apparently really into jeans because I have like 7 different flavors of denim in this outfit. I'm not sure where we found it all, but he found this poem that I wrote. It's probably somewhere like 4th or 6th grade. And so I thought I'd share with you just to kind of give you a sense of where I was at that time. And the poem is called Books by Minh Lê. It says, a book is the key to your imagination that will open the way to a location. It can be somewhere mysterious or somewhere serious. It can be somewhere exciting or somewhere inviting. You might meet someone nice or someone as cold as ice. You might meet someone once. You may meet them twice. So here I go to a land far away on a tropical vacation, and I don't have to pay. So that capper list, not only was I into books, I was incredibly cheap at that age even. But even though I didn't know I wanted to be a writer at that point, you can see that I was thinking about the power of books, the power of the imagination, and wanted to have a life in stories. So I thought I would start out by sharing a very personal story with you. So when I talk to kids and I talk to them about writing, they always ask me like, what my favorite stage of the writing process is. I always tell them, and I mean this, that for me, a book isn't done until it's being shared, until it's being read, right? As an author, I can send a book out into the world, but it's through the reading that the book comes to life and the meaning is conveyed, right? I can put a story out there, but I don't know what's gonna feel like to the reader. So for me, it's like sharing a story with people is how a book kind of like reaches its destination. So I always like to include at least a little bit of a story time aspect, and that's going to kind of allow us to talk a little bit about like the role that stories have played for me, and as far as like how I approach books and stories with my family and community. So the book I was going to share with you to start is called Drawn Together. This is a book that I share the most with people because it is a very personal story. It's inspired by my relationship with my grandparents, but most specifically my grandfather. So I was born in the US, in Connecticut on the East Coast, but my family's originally from Vietnam. So my grandparents, they moved here, but they spoke mostly Vietnamese. I spoke mostly English. And so I spent a lot of time with them, and we loved each other so much, but we didn't know how to communicate. We would I'd spend afternoons there and we didn't know how to talk about things. So I wanted to write a book that captured both the depth of love that exists in that type of relationship, but also some of the challenges that come with it. What I didn't realize is that Dan, the illustrator, who you can see it says Caldecott medalist Dan Santa. So he's won like the biggest awards you can win in children's books. He's Thai American, and he had the same experience. His grandmother lived in Thailand. She spoke exclusively Thai, he spoke exclusively English, and they never were able to connect. So this is a story that came from a very personal place for both of us. And so much so that we dedicate it to our grandparents. That's my grandfather on the left, and that's Dan's grandmother on the right. So I'll jump right into the story, and then we can go from there. So Drawn Together by me, illustrated by Dan Santat. So the story begins with a boy being dropped off by his mom. And he goes up and he rings the doorbell, and his grandfather answers. And you can see his grandfather super happy. He's so excited to see his grandson. And they greet each other with this traditional Thai greeting. The grandfather waves goodbye to the mom, off to have coffee with friends, at Capital C Cheesecake, or go to Target and buy toilet paper, all the fun stuff that you get to do when you drop your kids off. And the boy goes inside, and as you can see, he's not quite so sure how he feels about this. He's not sure if this is how he wants to spend his afternoon. I once did a presentation with a group of kindergartners, and this super precocious girl raised her hand and was like, "That boy looks apprehensive to me." And I was like, "That is you have an amazing vocabulary, and that's exactly right." So this boy is now apprehensive as he goes into his grandfather's home. But they sit down to eat, and the grandfather has made himself this beautiful bowl of noodle soup. But because he loves his grandson, he wants him to be happy. He makes him a hot dog with some French fries. And because he's a responsible grandfather, he makes a little side salad to make sure he gets his vegetables. But they sit down to eat, and eventually the boy asks, "So what's new, Grandpa?" And the grandfather responds with a question in Thai. And often I'll save this till the end to share with students what the grandfather is saying, but I'll share with you now. So when the boy's asking, "What's new, Grandpa?" the grandfather is actually asking, "How are you doing?" in Thai. So they're so close. They're like trying to have a conversation, but they're not able to get any further. So they continue eating in silence. Then after they eat, they sit down and they watch a movie, and it looks pretty exciting, but the movie's in Thai and the boy is not quite following. So the grandfather asks a question, and the boy asks, "Can we watch something else?" So here the grandfather is actually asking, "Would you like to watch something else?" So again, they're so close. They're right there, but they're unable to get any further. So they continue watching the movie in silence. Eventually the boy gets tired. He's like, "You know what? I can't follow along." And he kind of gives up and walks away. And he goes to his bag and he pulls out some paper and some colored pencils and some markers, and he starts to draw. And the grandfather comes over and he peeks over his shoulder and sees his grandson drawing a picture of himself as a wizard. And the grandfather gets super excited by this. So he goes off to the other room and comes back with his very own sketchbook, some ink and some paintbrushes. And now we hear the boy thinking, and he thinks, "Right when I gave up on talking, my grandfather surprised me by revealing a world beyond words. And in a flash, we see each other for the first time. And now you see the boy as his wizard character on one side, and on the other, you see the grandfather who has painted a picture of himself as one of the heroes from his childhood. So now all the things we can never say come pouring out. And we build a new world that even words can't describe. If you look down the corner, you'll see the grandfather and the grandson standing there kind of surveying this beautiful world that they've built together. But just when we're closer than ever, so something's starting to happen, things are starting to shake, that old distance. So the ground splits apart. You see the grandfather on one side, the grandson way on the other side. And if you look closely, you'll see that by the grandfather's feet is the boy's magic wand, and by the boy's feet is a grandfather's staff. So the ground splits apart, that old distance comes roaring back, and this dragon comes screaming out of the ground. But the grandfather grabs the boy's magic wand, he points at the dragon, and the boy grabs the grandfather's staff, faces off against the dragon and says, "This time, I'm not afraid. Because I know that together, we can make our way across." And so instead of letting that dragon keep them apart, they've transformed it into this bridge, which they now use to bring themselves back together. So now, after years of searching for the right words, we find ourselves happily speechless. And now we're back in the world of the grandfather's home. The grandfather and grandson are hugging. They're so happy. And if you look on the wall behind them, that whole adventure that we were just a part of was actually taking place in the artwork that they were making together. And then it's time to go home. The mom comes back. She is ecstatic. She's so excited to see that her father and her son have finally made that connection. And she hugs her dad. And as they drive off, you'll see the boys waving goodbye, holding one of the grandfather's paintbrushes. And the grandfather's waving goodbye, holding one of the boys' magic markers. So now that they've made this connection, it's just the beginning. They're going to continue to develop their relationship moving forward. I said it's just the beginning, but also the end of the book, but the beginning of their story together. So that is drawn together. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for now. Like I said, it's a very special book to me, partially because as a kid growing up, like I said, I didn't speak Vietnamese very well. And there's actually video of me at 4 years old speaking better Vietnamese than I do now. And I always say that if I had a time machine, I would go back in time and talk to that 4-year-old man and be like, please, please, please hold on to your Vietnamese. It's such a beautiful gift to have, to be able to speak to the people in your life and your community. And it's going to be something that you regret if you let go of it. Unfortunately, I don't have a time machine. If any of you out there in Tacoma Park have a time machine that I could borrow, I would love to. But the next best thing I can do is to go and talk to young people. And then when I'm talking to kids in schools, it's like, I can tell them that if you have multiple languages at home, or if languages are something you're interested in, then I encourage you to cultivate that, to hold on to that, basically so that you don't make the same mistakes that I did with this. So for me, it's like I said, we talk about the power of books and the power of stories. When I wrote this book, it felt very personal and like this personal failure that I held with me for my entire life, that like I let that language go. But when I put the book out into the world, what I didn't expect was to get so many people and families coming up to me after readings and sharing their own stories about their relationships with their grandparents. So I would say I had the exact same experience with my grandparents. We couldn't speak together in the same language. Some people would say, you know, I spoke English, or I spoke the same language as my grandparents, but we just couldn't connect. We just didn't vibe until we discovered a mutual love of music, or we started to cook together. And sharing those stories meant the world, because all of a sudden, like, I felt less alone. This is a book that I kind of wrote with that kind of like solitude and that kind of like sense of personal failure, but connecting with people was a wonderful way for me to feel like part of a community. Like I said before, when I was a kid, I was super shy and I was always reading, and I always thought of books as my escape from the world. So it's ironic now as an author that books have become my way back into the world, and I get to connect with readers like you and young people and kind of finding my footing again. What's the flip side of that, or one of the sad things about having this book out in the world, is a lot of times I'd be out and about, and people would ask me like, so what did your grandfather think about this book? He must be so proud. And I have to tell them that unfortunately I'll never know, because when I was working on the book, he knew I was working on a book, but I never told him what it was about. And this is a book about not being able to communicate with your grandfather, right? And I was like, how do I tell him about this, right? I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language, I just didn't have the fortitude to figure out how to convey this story that I was working on to him. So my hope was to have the book and hand it to him and share it with him, that and read it with him, and have that be the way that we connected and how I would show him what he meant to me. So unfortunately, as I was still working on the book, he got sick, and I got a call one day that he was in the hospital and he had like fallen into a coma. And that was the same week that I had gotten the first round of sketches for the book from Dan. So I printed out the book and I made this kind of makeshift copy with all the draft, all the sketches, and drove up there to Connecticut, from Tacoma to Connecticut to see him, and tried to share the book with him in that state. But unfortunately, he never emerged from the coma, and he passed away that week. So for me, when people ask me that, and I think about this is a book about making that connection with the people in your life, I'll always hold on to that sense of like, of not finding the way in time to bridge that gap, like the characters in the story did, right? There's no question in my mind that he loved me, that I loved him, that he knew that I loved him. But the fact that I couldn't share this with him will always be something that I kind of like, it's a regret that I'll hold on to for forever. But to flip it back around to the positive, the nice thing is that there's nothing that brings me more joy than having kids and families and teachers reading this story and saying, you know what, this made me call my grandparents and like connect with them. Or we spent the weekend drawing with our grandparents and painting or cooking, and like it made us want to connect with the people in our lives. So for me, it's like that's the transformative power of the book, because I can't think of a better way of honoring my grandfather than having his story, our story, and encourage and inspire other people to connect with the people in their lives that they care about before it's too late. And I always tell kids or people when I talk to them, it's like, it's never too soon to tell people that you love them. You can never say it enough. But unfortunately, it can be too late. So there's no need to wait. And when you have people in your life that you want to connect with, that you should go ahead and do that. And I think that my hope is that this book has at least in some way helped with that. And the fact that his picture is in there now, it's like the fact that anyone can go to a library or a bookstore, pick the book off the shelf and see his face means the world to me. I can't think of a better way of honoring him. When the book first came to our home, I sat down with my wife and my boys, and he had just passed away that month. And we opened the book, we read it together for the first time, and we opened it to that dedication page, and we saw the picture of my grandfather and my youngest, who was like two or three at the time, I forget. His eyes went wide and he goes, oh, it's Uncle. Uncle is great grandfather in Vietnamese. So he goes, it's Uncle, and he's smiling at me. And like my wife and I just like burst into tears. We're like crying. And but for me, it's like we talk about the power of books within families. For my boys to know that their family is represented on the page, at the library, in the bookstore, means the world to me. So that's just an example of, for me, how I went from a reader to a writer, and how the sharing of the book itself kind of shaped my experience and kind of had a very tangible impact on my life. In fact, last year I did a virtual visit with a school in Vietnam, and it was great. And then I went to a kindergarten class, and the only thing they wanted from me was to be able to speak in Vietnamese. They were just like, begging me to talk to them in Vietnamese. And I was like, I wrote a whole book about the fact that I can't do this. But we made it through and had a great time. But that actually inspired me to find a Vietnamese teacher. So I am now taking Vietnamese classes on the weekends, and tapping back into that Vietnamese that is dormant, that was back there. So it's taken a while, but I'm finally getting over that hump. So again, that book has had tangible impact in my life, and hopefully for some readers as well. I thought that might be a good time to pause, because like I said, I want to keep this as casual and conversational as possible. If we want to pause, if people had questions or wanted to chat about anything, I'm happy to take a few minutes to do that. I'm trying to check out the chat as we go too. But yeah, did anyone have any questions, or I see how and why did you let go of Vietnamese? So that's a great question. For me and my parents, so my parents came here, and I think for them, they always wanted us to hold on to our Vietnamese. But as people who are new to the country, they also had a priority of, we want to make sure that you can speak English. And I grew up in a Vietnamese community, but then once I started going to school, I made the mistake of my parents would speak to us in Vietnamese, ask us questions in Vietnamese, and I started responding in English, and slowly kind of let it atrophy and erode. And as it started to fade, my confidence with it went with it. And so then when I would try to speak Vietnamese, I would get so hung up on what I wasn't able to say, that would kind of like become a roadblock. Like my sisters actually have the same story, but they don't, somehow they did not adopt the same sense of shame that I did with the language. So like they'll speak it with not a perfect accent, but be fine with that and be like, okay, I'm going to power through and say it. And then, and that's allowed them to speak it better because they don't have that sense of like personal failure with it. For me, I would try to speak it, and I would just like have this sense of like, oh, I've just like that sense of loss. And so that kind of kept me from pushing through that wall. But now now at the ripe old age of 42, I've finally gotten over myself, and and started making moves to correct that.
Thank you so much. I'm proud of you that you're trying it now to get back into your mother's tongue.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I couldn't see who said that. I'm trying to.
Oh, it's me.
Oh.
Sorry, I had my video off.
Okay.
Now I teach my daughter German, and I'm the only one speaking to her in German. So I'm a little, concerned that she might give it up too one day. So I'm trying to figure out how to prevent that.
Yeah, it can be tricky because especially when you're a kid. My parents tried to have us go to Vietnamese language classes on the weekend, but the last thing you want to do when you're a kid is go to school on the weekends. So there's still a lot of that language there, and I can understand a good amount. And I think my wife always reminds me, or tries to remind me, that I focus so much on what I don't have or what I can't do that I kind of forget the things that I do have, how much I do understand, how much I do know, and coming at it from that, switching from that deficit mindset, to use the lingo, to one of like, okay, starting from where I am, has helped, because instead of being like, oh, all I can see is like what was lost, and that feels so daunting. That feels like something that's intimidating and a failure. But then realizing that I still do understand a good deal, and I value it, and I want to go forward. And if I can just give myself the license to take those steps, then hopefully I'll get there at some point.
I was looking through, and it, through the chat as well. And it's so neat how many people are connecting this story. And that's one of the things that I really love about, I live with picture books, that both of you have, Dan Santat and you as well, have written. And I would love for you to go through that. But one of the things that I talk to the children a lot about, which now that we have you on the line, I'd love to hear the answer, is how did you collaborate? Like, you have this, you have the story and Dan is in a different, well, he's in California too, but like you're in different houses, obviously. I'd always talk with the children about what it would be like to talk to each other and create something so beautiful that resonates with so many people. And you're not like, how did you do that? Like, what was your process?
That's a great question. It's something that a lot of people don't realize about picture books is that it's kind of an industry standard that the author and illustrator don't talk to each other directly during the process. I think that was like those protocols were put in place a long time ago, probably because like somewhere along the lines you had a couple of like big egos that like, and it blew up and they're like, this isn't working. But so I wrote the manuscript. And what's interesting too is that usually if you're the author, not the illustrator, you write a story and then the editor finds an illustrator that would go with it. In this case, it was completely backwards in that Dan had just won the Caldecott for The Adventures of Beagle, and an editor that I was working with had worked with him before, so she took him out to celebrate. And while they're celebrating, she said, you know, I'm started working with this new author named Min. I think you two would make a good pair. And maybe had a few drinks, but he said, yeah, that sounds good to me. So I got an email from my agent that night saying, we have a chance to work with Dan Santat. You need to send me 2 to 3 book ideas within 2 days because he just won the Caldecott. His life is about to go on this like whirlwind roller coaster. If we don't strike now, we might miss our chance. So my wife and I had just come back from the hospital with our second son. And so I have this memory of sitting in our little Cape Cod house on Lincoln Avenue in Tacoma Park at 3 a.m., rocking this baby to sleep, being like, how do you write a story for someone who just won the biggest award in children's books? And actually right across the way from me in the house was this painting behind, it's a lacquer painting from Vietnam. And it's a picture of like an older man and a boy, and they're like writing calligraphy. And that must have put something in my mind, and holding my son and like thinking about family and all that stuff. That's how this book came about. So that was very completely backwards. But my strategy for writing with an author is like, I always feel like I've found a cheat code for making books because a manuscript will look like 1-2 pages front and back. And what I try to do is give enough of the sketch and outline of a story for the illustrator to kind of take it and run. And with Dan, like for example, with this story, the grandfather speaks Thai in the book, even though I'm Vietnamese American. And I have an aunt who says, you're Vietnamese, why don't you make the illustrator make the characters Vietnamese? For me, I had to write a story that I wanted Dan to be able to bring his own experience to and infuse it with his own personal story and details. And I think that's what makes the book strong, because you can feel how much he put into the story. He told me, I didn't know this until after the fact, but I was listening to an interview of his and he said, I just won this big award. I was doing all these books and I was working mostly digitally. And I was getting a lot of manuscripts to my style. And he's like, and I was working quickly. I was doing it really well, but I felt like I was in this creative rut because I was just doing what I do. He said, but then I got the manuscript for Drawn Together, and it's about characters making art together, and the grandfather was painting, and he's like, I wanted the characters in order to reflect that and to show that. So he's like, I picked up a physical paintbrush for the first time in 10 years and started painting. So all of the pictures of the grandfather, those are all painted painstakingly by hand. And that was him investing himself in the story and bringing his own experience and his own motivations to the story. And to me, that's a dream. You write a story and it unlocks something for the illustrator and takes them to allows them to find another level within their own artwork. On a more technical level, you'll notice that the text in the book, if you pull the text out of the story, there's no story there. It's like it kind of like works in concert with the illustrations. So the manuscript has the text and then some light illustration notes, kind of letting Dan know what happens on the page. Very like generally, like they sit down to eat, or like they after dinner they sit and watch a movie, that kind of thing. And just a very light touch to give the sense of the story, so he knows what kind of is happening from page to page, but all the details, all of the artwork is left to him to create and play with. And for me as an author, I don't know if anyone's interested in writing. If I could illustrate it myself, I would love to. So it is in my best interest as a writer to leave room for the illustrator to work their magic, right? It's like you want them, they are storytellers in their own right. Dan has written his own books a ton. So you want him to bring his creative talent to the page, and it would not be in my interest to kind of like pen him into my specific vision. So I could have a whole different presentation that does a deep dive into the technical aspects of the book and what was on the page and what wasn't. So I could talk about that all day. But
you know, the lovely thing is that the part about the unlocking, because even through the chat and what you've shared with us is like the unlocking of something. And I'll close and let other people ask questions, but I just want to tell you how grateful I am for you sharing that story, because now I get to share that story with children. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always glad to chat about this stuff. Is anyone out there interested in writing? Are there aspiring authors out there? Nice. Specifically picture books or other kind of writing? Nice. Yeah, if you all have questions about the technical side of things, I'm happy to share. Something that I do sometimes for people is I'll send people a copy of the manuscript, so they can hold it side by side with the book and kind of get a sense of like what that looks like. Because for me, when I was starting out writing, I was like, I think so visually, but I was like, how do you write a manuscript for a picture book when half of the story is told through the pictures, right? So I had to like unlock how to do that, because I would try to illustrate books, and I was like, I would always run up against this like brick wall of my lack of talent or the limitations of my talent, right? And be like, I can't put on the page the story that I have in my head. So I had to figure out how to put the story on the page in a way that allows an illustrator to take it from there. And a lot of times you'll get questions from people saying, what's it like to have an illustrator, someone else illustrate your book? And I always tell them to back up a half step, because when you're making picture books and you're not the illustrator, I never call it my book. I always try to describe it as our book, because it is very much a collaborative process. And that's the only way for it to work in my mind. You have to give the illustrator the room to come to the story and tell the story as well for it to come through. I've seen plenty of books where it's like, you can tell it's like the illustrator was just doing the job, right? Because they're not invested. And I think a lot of that is because the author held too tightly to the reins and didn't allow the illustrator to invest themselves. So it's a tricky process, but I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful way of telling stories, and it's my favorite form of storytelling. Did anyone else have any questions, technical or otherwise? If not, I know that. If not, I know that you wanted. Oh, I see somebody. Jim, did you have a question?
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, please.
So, there are these. Okay, and don't laugh at me because I'm not a social media like, but there are these groups on Twitter, mm-hmm. and they have like these picture book. I can't remember what they call them, and I guess everyone's pitching their idea, and people are hoping to get picked, mm-hmm. And I mean, is that? I feel like that's. I mean, once you put your idea out there, isn't it that kind of just making it fair game for?
That's a really good question.
I guess they don't have your voice; they can't tell the story like you tell it,
yeah. But it is a good question, and something that every author goes through is the fear of like coming up with what you think is a new idea, and then going to the library and then finding that exact book on the shelf. That's happened to me at least a half dozen times. I would say, like you said, and there's a really great author who said something to this effect. It's like it's not necessarily that the story is new, but the way you tell it is new, right? So like there's a million stories about imaginary friends out there, but it's through your voice and through the way you want to tell it is going to be fresh and unique each time. I would be wary if you think you have something that really is innovative and hasn't been done before. I would personally be worried about putting that out there and having it be swept away, and like, because there's no way of tracking that back and saying, oh, you stole that idea from my tweet that day. And so, but I don't know. Like I said, no one book is going to be exactly the same. So there's always a risk, but if that risk allows you to connect with someone who allows you to take your idea and run with it, maybe it's worth the risk. I don't know. But yeah, no, that's the social media world is very tricky on that front. And I have some Asian friends who are like, they have to tell their authors, stop giving your ideas away for free. You're posting all this stuff. It's like, that's all content that we could use down the road. Be careful of just putting it out there. So it's definitely something you have to keep in mind all the time. Oh, I see another question. I saw a question that just for.
We have two about Asian. Where in Connecticut are you from? Second generation Asian American, now living in Tacoma Park. Oh.
Okay, so I grew up. Oh, here's a question. So where in Connecticut are you from? Oh, I'm sorry to hear, Yasmin, about your grandmother. Yeah, I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut. So if you know Wesleyan University, that's where I grew up. My parents live in West Hartford now. And yeah, what's interesting is that my grandparents, our immigrant story is interesting in that, like a lot of immigrant communities, my dad was in Connecticut first, had a job, and then his parents came over, moved to Connecticut. So, and then his siblings came. So we kind of like, our family kind of started this small community just because of proximity and and location. I used to joke that in our hometown, you could fit all the Vietnamese people into one minivan, and that minivan belonged to my uncle, and we would just drive around. But my grandparents actually started the Vietnamese Buddhist Association of Connecticut when they got there, because they saw like there wasn't anywhere for them to go. And my grandmother started a grocery store selling Vietnamese, like a Vietnamese market. So they kind of became this hub of the community, which was an amazing thing to see. And they're both no longer with us, but it means a lot to me to be able to share them with you all and with other people. When it's to go back to when my grandfather passed away during this book, when this book was coming out, I had to write his eulogy and give a speech. And he was very much a man of very few words, even in Vietnamese or English. He like was very quiet, right? And he's like known for being quiet, but like it had a presence. And so I was talking to my cousins about this and giving this speech. And I was like, what's interesting is that because we didn't speak to him much, our relationship wasn't defined by words. Our relationship very much existed in those quiet spaces and those silences, right? And so I was like, now that he's gone and we can't talk to him, it almost feels like I feel just as close in a lot of ways, because it's not his voice that I'm missing. I can still feel his presence within those quiet spaces, because that was where our relationship existed. So it's almost like a blessing in that I feel almost as close to him now as I did before, partially because I'm going out and sharing this book and sharing him with so many people. He's part of the fabric of my day-to-day. So as much as I do miss him, it's like it's nice that I've found a way to incorporate him into my life in a way that feels very real and very, very powerful. And I think whether that's with books or with other things, with your family, with your grandmother, I'm sure that you found ways to keep her memory alive within your home. And that idea of, like I said before, I always regret not sharing that particular thing with him, but that regret fades over time as I focus more on like the the strength that was there and what we do have and what his influence as it continues to move forward. And I can see that through my day-to-day. I can see that through like my boys and how much they think about him and how much of a presence he still has. And so yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother.
And then we have a family posting about the crisis in Ethiopia because the language is taken. And then people are silenced because that language. So it's like, this is really resonating with people. And he poses the question, do your parents both speak the same language?
Yes, my parents both speak Vietnamese, and thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to hear about the situation there. My parents do both speak Vietnamese. I went back to Vietnam for the first time in 30 years recently, right before COVID, to visit and see my grandmother, who's 98 right now, and it was beautiful to get to spend time with her. I slowly felt my Vietnamese defrosting as I was there day to day, kind of got used to it again. But yeah, no, language is so powerful in how we preserve memory and all of that, and what we can convey to future generations, even without that language, is something. But I know that so much gets lost without the native language, and to happening there, like the actually being expressed in that way is difficult to read. It's happening all over the place. That's part
I was wondering, about memory, how memory is passed on and if it's taken from you. So that's a struggle that it's very tragic. And then so anyway.
And for me, it's like I know like situations like that are going on. And so for me to feel like I am the one who's holding myself back from learning the language, there's no one keeping me from that except myself. I need to get over myself and do what I can to preserve what I have, for myself, for my children as well. And just so much, and I'm sure a lot of you can sympathize with this, so much of my own life is like finding ways to get over myself and stop being my own worst enemy.
And was it dad of the year? It's dad of the century, dad of the year. What a question was posed about where your children are when you're writing. So.
My children are, well, what's interesting is that I get so many of my ideas for stories from my kids. So they're around all the time. And the thing about writing a picture book is that there's so few words. It's mostly like trying to come up with an idea. So for me, those ideas come from putting my phone away, turning TV off, and spending time, like being present. And that means being present with my boys and my kids. And just when I talk to students, they're asked like where you get your ideas, and I always tell them that half of my job as a children's author is trying to recapture that magic of being a kid and seeing the world with fresh eyes. And so having children of my own to kind of like draw upon, is like, that's an amazing resource to have. So I spend as much time with them, and not just from a strategic standpoint, but it also helps. I see this. Do your kids have any interest in learning Vietnamese? They are very interested. It's funny. So after I have my Vietnamese classes on Sundays, we'll talk, and they'll try to ask me questions. And then when we Zoom with my parents, they'll always ask them different words and stuff like that. So they are, I think they have a very natural interest, and I think they've seen kind of like how I talk about that loss. And so I think they've internalized the flip side of that and the value, because they've seen how much I talk about the value of what I had given up, right? So I think they've internalized the value of those languages and what that can mean.
Min, I'm wondering, sorry, this is Yasmin, my video is not working, so sorry about that. Thank you for your answer before. But I find it interesting that you talk about giving up your language when really this is just another effect of like colonization and white supremacy, because there weren't structural supports for you as an Asian American second generation heritage speaker to get to study the language in a structured, supported way in school. You know, in other places, like I know in England, for example, kids who speak languages that aren't taught or aren't offered in the schools have, in some districts, have the ability to get dispensation so that they can be taught like the language that they are, you know, already have a background in, so that they will be able to use it in a, you know, they'll be able to get to some kind of speaking ability much quicker than starting a language from scratch. And of course, we don't have anything like that here. And the only languages that are really offered across the country, especially from childhood, are Spanish and French, and we speak English, which of course are all, you know, colonizer languages. So, you know, we don't have those options. So it's not you. It's not your fault. You know, like it's something that you lost, and that was not your fault. It was because of the structural inequity and the structural white supremacy that doesn't center, you know, the languages of other places, or offer those opportunities to children or families, or, you know. And I see someone else noted in the comments, and Emma, that she's an ESOL teacher, and, you know, this shift from English as a second language or English language learners to multilingual. You know, imagine if we had grown up in Connecticut in an environment where they were like, hey, what languages do you speak at home? Awesome. How can we support you? What can we give you? And how can we get you to fluent, instead of having to like become an adult and have these private struggles, which actually so many of us as second and third generation kids share.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a really good point. I think and my wife will say the same thing, Lash. Like you're overly harsh on yourself as far as like that goes, because you're right, it is very context specific, and like those structures weren't in place, and it was kind of presented when you're in our generation as like an either or proposition, and there weren't any supports for the home language in that way. You had to kind of like create it out of whole cloth, or just not have it. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that perspective, and you're exactly right. I do think that within that structure and that context and that lack of support, I think when I say I let it go, it's partially because I know that even within that context, there was a part of me that didn't care to try enough to take that extra, even if it shouldn't have been on my shoulders to do so. And maybe I'm being too harsh on myself as that little kid who let it, who didn't have that wherewithal. But so yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, be gentler with yourself. I mean, obviously you're taking Vietnamese, you wrote this whole book, you're sharing, and we're all getting to share our own experiences, but this is another function of white supremacy, that like marginalized identities and languages are something that we actively have to seek out and have that like personal resolve to keep practicing and being like, no, I'm not going to let this go. Most people don't have that realization until they're almost adults or adults, where it's like, oh, this was something that I really wish had been easier to hold on to. And then it's this lifelong journey to try to get it back.
Yeah, no, I really do appreciate that. I'll remember that for next time.
Think about that every time you try to blame yourself.
Right.
It's not your fault.
Oh, I'll put it on a little sticky note and put it on my laptop for a daily affirmation.
Perfect.
I know that you wanted to talk to about like kind of like thoughts on cultivating like a life of like a reading in the home and all of that. So despite being, I mean, obviously one of the 100 coolest dads in the US, I try not to give too much parenting advice, because I'm always like, you know your home's best and all that. But as far as what's worked for us, I always tell people that very basic stuff like reading as early and often as possible. There's a picture of me reading with my first son like in the hospital, like as we were like right after he was born, like I'm sitting there, he's sleeping on my chest, and I'm like reading a book to him out loud. And I think a lot of times I talk to new parents, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I can't wait to read this book when my kid is old enough." And I was like, they're never too young to experience a book, whether you're reading it to them or just like the visuals of it. And I think someone shared with you all on my website, there's a saying that says like all the time is story time. And for me, that was something that we always said when the kids were young, because we'd always be reading story books with them. But also, like, if we're driving and we stop and we have like 5 minutes while we wait for somebody to show up, they want to read a story, they want to tell a story, they want to fill that time with stories. And so we say all the time is story time, both because like we try to read as much as possible, like kind of like make up stories as much as possible. And then also for me, when I talk to my boys about it, it's like kind of like create that sense of like them living their own story, and like this life being a story, and like kind of thinking about their lives in that way is kind of like a fun way for us to share that all. When I talk about kind of like reading at home, something that I try to be very conscious about is making sure to model reading for them. Like, they see me reading a lot and my wife reading a lot, and so it becomes something that they see there's inherent value to, and not just like a chore, right? It's not just like something you have to do for school or something like that. It's like it's an activity that we both value. We try to create time for. It's a struggle, like I said. Like, I need to be better about putting my phone away, about closing the laptop. I remember I have a very vivid memory from when I was a kid. We were at the beach, and my parents were both reading this book, and they were both so into it that they tore it in half so that they could both read at the same time. Like my dad read ahead so that he could read the second half, while my mom read the first half. And just like seeing them, like that physical act of tearing the book, I was like, this reading thing must be amazing. That they're like, they go through that trouble of like doing that. I was like, and that like imprinted on me, like that sense, like books and reading as a thing of value, and not just like something that you have to do. Because I think that if the best way to have to create a lifelong reader is to have someone who like loves reading, that attaches joy to the act of reading, right? And so with another thing that we talk about when I talk to librarians and teachers, they're always like, for us, it's important to let kids drive the reading materials as much as possible. For me, that includes like, there are a lot of books that we read at home for bedtime that I don't want to read. I'm like, I'm tired of reading this book, but they love it so much and they get so much out of it. It's like that I grow to love it even after so many readings, because like I want them to have that memory and that joy. And then for older kids, the big part of the conversation now with teachers and librarians is like graphic novels, right? Because some people are like, oh, why don't you pick up a real book? But and graphic novels to me are, I'm kind of self-serving because I write graphic novels as well. But they are very much real books, and it's like a story can be told in any format, right? And I think to shame kids for reading a graphic novel just does a disservice, because it's like then they think there's a right kind of reading and a wrong kind of reading, and if they enjoy the wrong kind of reading, then they're going to kind of assign that value and have this complicated relationship with it. So a little pitch for graphic novels is like, what I love about it is with a graphic novel, you have the text, you have the image, then you have the interplay between the two, and that creates like unlocks this whole nother layer of meaning that is unique to the format. And what I love about graphic novels too is that when you're in schools, you see these kids just passing them around with each other because you can read them so quickly. It creates this community of reading because they can have this shared reading experience that feels light and something that they are just naturally drawn to. And that kind of experience, I think, will lead to different books, like more prose novels, because what it does is it develops and instills a love of story, and then they'll find stories wherever they can find it, and that'll be in different kinds of books later on as well. So I think that sense of joy in reading is is probably the most important thing. I think about a lot with like, I grew up taking piano lessons, and I never liked taking lessons. And I never saw my parents playing or listening to music around the house. So it just felt like you have to practice because it's the thing you do, right? And now it's like the idea of like, if I had seen music more broadly as something that was just a part of the fabric of the home, part of that, maybe I would have looked at piano differently or music differently. I think the same thing with reading, like having books around, seeing your parents reading, seeing that just it being a shared memory is what's going to build that foundation for later on. So when my oldest was in Tacoma Park Elementary, he came home one day with this picture he did for kindergarten, and it showed like me and him on the couch, and there are all these like green blocks all around the room. I was like, what is that stuff like around the couch? And he's like, oh, those are the piles of books all over the house. And I was like, oh, it was a very accurate portrayal of the home. I used to, or I still do, review children's books. So my boys lived in this magical world where we got every picture book that was published in a given year sent to our house for free. So because publishers would send them. So they lived in this world where you open the door and there'd just be a stack of books waiting for you. So I recognize that they have a unique advantage in that sense. But even when I was a kid growing up, we'd go to the library all the time and just be surrounded by books and stories. Though part of the reason why when people ask me like why I decided to write, my parents would take us to the library all the time when I was a kid. And we were the kids who would come to the table or the checkout with like a stack of books taller than we were, right? And so we always had books around. But then when it came time to go to bed and do story time at night, my parents rarely picked up those books. We'd lay there in the dark and they would tell us stories about their childhood in Vietnam or stories they grew up with. And I realized later on that they were kind of forced into the role of storyteller because the stories they wanted to share with us weren't at the library. They weren't in the bookstore, right? So they had to take it upon themselves to fill in the gaps that publishing had yet to fill. So now and I think seeing them do that and seeing them take that initiative kind of instilled in me that value of like needing to or wanting to tell the stories that weren't out there, right? So that's part of why I think writing books like Drawn Together mean a lot to me, because that's not a book that I saw when I was a kid. So getting to share that with people has been really special. But I know we're running short. I could have kept going, but I know that we're running short on time for you also. Is there anything else that you want to chat about before I let you go for the night? I know it's late over there. But yeah, Amy and Leslie, thank you so much for inviting me. And like I said, it's so nice to get to park even for a little bit. And yeah, I was talking to my wife earlier and I was like, our boys talk about Sligo Creek so much. So I hope next time you're down there, you tell Sligo Creek that our family says hi.
Do you know that that's where our children go to Sligo Creek all the time, our students and our children too, I'm sure, but yeah, that's part of the school program to like go visit the woods of Sligo Creek.
I love it. No, I know so many families that had their families with your school and they've said nothing but wonderful things about it. So so thank you for everything that you're doing for your kids and your families. I know it's been an incredibly difficult couple of years. So I really appreciate everything that you're doing to support kids and families in the community. Even though we're not there with you anymore, we're sending our love from the West Coast.
Well, you are kind of here with us because we have your books, so it's good. You're here. You're with us.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I am just, the idea of your kids thinking about living their story, thinking of their life as living out a story. think that resonates. And it just, like I told you earlier, we had 3 alumni students speak at the beginning, and they were talking all about how story kind of enriches their life. And I was just thinking they probably would concur that their life is a story.
Nice. I wish I could have heard them, but I hope that that this dovetailed well with what they said.
It sure did. Yes, everything was kind of, yeah, everything was about story and storytelling and the power of that and how it enriches experience. So, wow, there's a lot to think about. And I just am grateful that I had the chance to learn from you tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone. I always love that Tacoma Park is part of my family story. So thank you for spending time with me tonight. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to chat, you can reach me through Amy or Leslie. And yeah, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And then I just will, as people are signing out, Sunny just reminded us that our local Loyalty bookstore in downtown Silver Spring has men's books.
Has Lift and Drawn Together. Has all of them. Yeah.
Which bookstore is this? Is this Loyalty Bookstore?
Yeah.
Nice. No, I love them. So yeah, no, if you go into Loyalty Bookstore and see Hannah, tell her I said hi.
We will. Hannah, we had the honor of learning from Hannah last year, so she's a new friend of ours as well.
Yeah, no, she's fantastic. So you know, yeah, thank you. This is really heartwarming from my end. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for Yasmin for telling me to take it easy on myself a little bit and stop beating myself up. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Always.
Yeah, her advice is always usually pretty good, right? Yasmin, she gives us advice, she guides us, so it's good.
Okay, well, thank you all, and I hope you have a good night. And hopefully
thank you.
we'll cross again soon.
Bye.
Thanks.